princess was betrayed at the ball. Then Duke saved her. The silk fan snapped in Alara's hand before she even knew she had broken it. She stood at the edge of the Somerset ballroom with the pieces in her fingers and the sound of Beatrice's laughter in her ears, and she understood, with the particular clarity that only arrives when something has been true for a long time and you have only just looked directly at it, that she had been foolish for considerably longer than tonight. The ballroom was everything it was supposed to be. 400 candles in the chandeliers above, the best of London society arranged below in silk and powder, and the practiced expression of people who are always performing and have forgotten this is not the same as living. The orchestra was playing at Allemande. The Somerset family crest was above the east door. It was the kind of evening that would be described in letters tomorrow as magnificent, by people who had spent it watching other people suffer. Julian was supposed to ask for her hand tonight. He had said so. Not formally. Julian Vane, Lord Ashford's heir, never said anything formally when he could say it with just enough ambiguity to retreat from later, but he had said it in the garden 2 weeks ago, with the particular voice he used when he wanted her to believe something, and she had believed it because she was 19 and he had brown eyes and she had, in her private heart, been allowing herself to be a fool about him since the spring season. Her private heart was now in Beatrice's hands. Literally. Her cousin stood 6 feet away, at Julian's side, and in her gloved fingers was a small blue book that Alara recognized the way you recognized something that had no business being where it was, with the stomach-dropping certainty of wrongness before the mind has caught up to explain it. Her diary. The one she kept in the locked drawer of her writing desk. The one in which she had, over the course of a summer, written about Julian in the way girls wrote about men they were foolish about, and about her dreams of a quiet life, a real one, away from court and expectation and the particular exhaustion of being Princess Alara of the House of Somerset, who was required to be composed and excellent and entirely without private feelings at all times. Beatrice was reading aloud. She was doing it quietly. This was the surgical part, the part that told Alara this had been planned with care, just loud enough for the 6 people nearest her and for Julian, who was not even trying to conceal his smirk. Her foolish dreams of a quiet life. That was the phrase Beatrice chose. She read it with a delicate, shuddering laugh, and the 6 people nearest her looked at Alara, and the 6 people beyond those 6 people looked at Alara, and the ripple began. Alara felt it move through the room. 100 judgmental eyes finding her from their various coordinates in the ballroom, each one arriving with the same expression, not cruel, most of them, simply avid, the expression of people at a very good performance who are looking to see how the lead actress manages the difficult scene. Julian was moving toward her now. He had the expression he used when he was delivering something he had enjoyed preparing, pleasant on the surface and satisfied underneath, the expression of a boy who had been given permission to do something unkind and was making the most of it. He had her diary. He had her cousin. He had a room full of witnesses. And Alara was standing at the edge of the ballroom with a broken fan and nothing else, because she had spent 3 years learning to be composed and none at all learning what to do when composure was the last thing that would save her. She was not going to cry. She had decided this before he was halfway across the room, with the specific certainty of someone choosing the only thing still available to choose. She was not going to cry in the Somerset ballroom in front of 400 people. Whatever happened in the next 60 seconds, she was going to hold her spine exactly as it was and look at Julian Vane and give him nothing. She had just arranged this resolution firmly in place when a shadow fell over her. It came from her left, large and unhurried, and with it came a voice deep, dry, with the particular quality of a man who speaks at the volume he chooses regardless of the room's acoustics, that cut through the orchestra and the whispers and Julian's approaching footsteps with the efficiency of something that has always been able to do this and has simply been waiting for the occasion. "I believe this dance belongs to me, Your Highness." She turned. The Duke of Ashbourne was not what the ballroom expected. He was tall, genuinely tall, not the elevated kind that came from well-made boots, with dark hair and the kind of face that was almost too handsome, despite its cold expression. He was beautiful. There was a scar along his left neck, thin and old, which the Ton had been speculating about for 3 seasons. He was 31. He was famously, legendarily antisocial, which in a society that considered attendance at events like this one a form of civic duty made him a minor scandal all on his own. He was looking at Julian Vane. Unless, the Duke continued, with the mild, terrible courtesy of a man who does not raise his voice because he doesn't need to, Lord Julian finds his current conversation with a stolen diary more stimulating than the company of a future queen. The ballroom did not go silent. It was worse than that. It went interested. Julian stopped. The pleasant surface of his expression flickered. "Ashbourne," he said. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited." "I was not," the Duke said pleasantly. "I invited myself. I find that is the most reliable method." He turned to Alara and offered his hand, gloved, steady, waiting without pressure, and looked at her with eyes that were grey and direct and contained. She noticed the specific quality of someone who has assessed the situation and decided what to do about it. She took his hand. She did not know why, entirely. She knew that her options were limited. She knew that walking onto the floor on the arm of the Duke of Ashbourne was better than standing at the edge of it holding a broken fan while Beatrice read her diary aloud. She knew that the ballroom was watching and that she needed to give it something to watch other than her humiliation. She also knew, in the 3 seconds between his hand closing around hers and them moving toward the floor, that he had not done this because he felt sorry for her. His expression contained no pity. It contained something cooler and more considered than that. He had done it because he had decided to. She did not yet know what that meant. But she straightened her spine and let him lead her onto the floor, and behind her she heard Julian say something to Beatrice that she decided not to listen to, and ahead of her the orchestra shifted into a waltz, and the Somerset ballroom turned its 400 pairs of eyes onto the princess and the cold Duke and began immediately, furiously, to talk about them. She did not look back. "Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden beauty and unexpected love, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories where pain shatters and true character shines through. And if you'd like, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and your presence makes these stories come alive." Chapter 2. He held her a fraction too close. She noticed it in the first 8 bars of the waltz, not scandalously, nothing that would give the matrons a clean target, but enough. Enough that she could smell the sandalwood and the faint expensive wool of his coat. Enough that the prescribed distance of 1770s decorum, which she had been observing her entire life, had been quietly set aside in favor of something slightly, deliberately different. "You shouldn't have intervened," she said. "Good evening to you too, Your Highness. I mean it." She kept her voice low, because the nearest couples were at the outer limit of hearing range and she had no interest in providing additional material. "Now they'll whisper about you. Let them." He turned her through the pattern of the waltz with the confident ease of a man who knows the steps well enough not to think about them. "My reputation has been living in the gutter since I refused to marry the king's goddaughter 3 seasons ago. It's quite spacious down there." A pause, precise. "I've been waiting for someone interesting to join me." She looked up at him, which was necessary because of the height differential and which she did not care for because it put her at a slight disadvantage in terms of the conversation's spatial dynamics. "I am not joining you in the gutter. No. You're dancing with me in a ballroom, which the ton will translate into approximately the same thing by morning." He was entirely unbothered by this. "The question is what you intend to do about it." "What I intend," she said, "is to finish this dance, retrieve my diary, and have a conversation with my cousin that will be private and extremely clear." "Your cousin gave the diary to Julian," he said. "Julian gave it to 3 other people before Beatrice read from it. It is no longer retrievable in any form that protects its contents." He said this without cruelty, which somehow made it more bearable than cruelty would have been. "What is retrievable is the room's opinion of you, which is currently in the balance." She was quiet for a moment, watching the faces at the edge of the floor that were watching them. "You seem very knowledgeable about my diary's distribution." "I am observant," he said. "And I arrived 40 minutes ago expressly because someone sent me a note describing what was planned." "Who?" "Your lady's maid. She came to my club." Alara thought of her maid, quiet, loyal, 10 years in her service and felt something tighten in her chest that was not the corset. She came to your club. She is a practical woman. She sent word to the only person in London she thought might both care and be able to do something about it. He looked at her steadily. I'm still deciding whether the assessment was accurate. The caring part or the doing something part? Both, he said, and she heard, very faintly, something underneath the dryness that was not dry at all. She turned this over. He led her through the next figure of the waltz, and she moved with him, and the ballroom watched them both, and Julian was somewhere at the edge of it with Beatrice and her cousin's stolen access to Alara's innermost thoughts, and all of it was terrible and humiliating, and yet here in the center of the floor with the candles overhead and the Duke's hand steady at her waist, she felt something she had not expected to feel. Steady. Not saved. Not rescued. Something different from that, the feeling of having ground under her feet again after several minutes of finding none. He was going to ask for my hand tonight, she said. I know. He wasn't going to. I know that too. She looked at him. How long have you known what he was planning? Long enough to know you deserved better than to find out in a ballroom. His jaw tightened fractionally. Julian Vane is a man who collects advantages and calls it strategy. Your position, your father's regard, and your documented feelings were 3 advantages he intended to use and then exchange for something more profitable when it suited him. He met her gaze. You are not a fool for believing him. You are a fool if you continue to. She stopped, because the bluntness of it had landed exactly where it was aimed and she had no prepared response. That was rather direct. You seem like someone who prefers it. I do, she said, after a moment. It's simply unusual. They completed the waltz in the particular silence of 2 people who have said something real and are deciding what to do with it. When the music ended and they separated with the correct formality of the bow and the curtsy, she looked at him and found him watching her with the same grey, direct attention. Miss Voss, he started, then corrected himself immediately. Your Highness. I apologize. She looked at him. Who is Miss Voss? No one. He said it without visible disturbance, which was itself informative. A slip. He offered his arm toward the edge of the floor. May I escort you somewhere less observed? She took his arm. And as they moved away from the floor, past the watching faces and the silent, resumed conversations that were not silent at all, he bent slightly and said, very quietly, near her ear, if you want to truly punish Julian, don't cry. Don't collapse. Make him believe you've traded a boy for a lion. She said nothing. But she lifted her chin, and she walked as if the Somerset ballroom and everyone in it was simply the background of a story she was telling on her own terms. Behind her, she heard Julian say something. She did not turn around. Chapter 3. The conservatory was at the end of the east corridor, through a door that required knowing where it was, and the Duke knew where it was because he had, she suspected, spent more time avoiding ballrooms than attending them and had mapped the exits accordingly. It was cold in the conservatory. Beautiful moonlight through the glass ceiling, the shapes of exotic plants in their boxes, the smell of green things and turned earth, but cold, because November did not care about romantic settings. She did not ask for tea. There was no tea. There were 2 stone benches and a good view of the garden through the glass and the sound of the orchestra muffled by 2 doors and a corridor, and for the first time in 3 hours Alara felt the room stop watching her. Saturday. He stood for a moment, then sat on the other bench with the slight awkwardness of a man who fills a space and knows it. Better, he said. Yes. She looked at her hands, which were still holding the 2 pieces of the broken fan. She set them down beside her. I should thank you. You should have better locks on your writing desk, he said. But yes, the thanks is also appropriate. She looked at him. He was looking at the plants, and in the moonlight the scar along his jaw was more visible, thin and silver, and his profile was the profile of someone who has been stern for long enough that it has become structural. How did she get in? He said. Your cousin. The diary. She knows where I keep the key. Ilara paused. She has always known. We were close, when we were children. You trusted her. I trusted her for a long time. Then I trusted her out of habit. She looked at the moonlit glass. That's a different thing. Yes, he said, and something in the word was not commentary on her situation but recognition of something in his own, and she heard it. You said your reputation was already in the gutter, she said. Since the king's goddaughter. Among other events, yes. What were the other events? He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, she was beginning to distinguish his silences, which was something she would examine later, the fact that she already had a taxonomy of them. This one was precise. Deciding how much to say. There was a woman, he said. Before the goddaughter business. Several years ago. He turned the ring on his right hand, once, and stopped. She was clever and very beautiful, and she understood exactly how to present herself as someone who wanted the same things I did. The quiet. The books. The unglamorous version of a life that didn't require performing constantly. He paused. She wanted my title and my estate in Derbyshire and access to my family's connections in Parliament. The rest was very well executed theatre. I'm sorry, Elara said. Don't be. I was. He looked at her. I'm not anymore. What I am is careful, which is a different thing and more useful. And yet here you are, she said. In a ballroom you weren't invited to, dancing with a princess you've never met, because a lady's maid sent a note to your club. Here I am, he agreed. Why? The word sat in the conservatory between them, and the plants were very still, and the orchestra was a distant suggestion through the walls. He looked at her with the grey eyes that she had decided, in the last 30 minutes, were the most direct eyes she had encountered in 19 years at court. Because the note described a girl who had written in her diary about wanting a quiet life, he said, and who was about to be publicly humiliated for it. And I find, he paused on the word, testing it, I find I have very little patience for the punishment of people whose only offense is wanting something real. She looked at him. He looked at her. From the corridor outside, somewhere between the conservatory door and the ballroom, came the unmistakable sound of Lord Julian Vane, who had apparently located the brandy and lost track of his coordination, calling her name in the theatrical, aggrieved tone of a man who wants a scene on his own terms. Elara. Elara, I know you're out here. Come out and stop being ridiculous. The Duke moved with a speed that surprised her off the bench and to the plant stand in 2 steps, positioning himself in front of her, which put her effectively behind a large and assertive fern that blocked the sightline from the corridor door. He was very close. She could smell the sandalwood again, and the brandy he'd apparently had at some point, and underneath both of those things something that was simply him, warm and steady. Julian's footsteps went past the door. His voice retreated down the corridor, still calling, diminishing into petulance. The Duke, facing the door, said in a voice pitched only for her, He's been wandering this corridor for 6 minutes. I've timed it. A pause. He walks past this door, calls your name at the same volume regardless of whether he's near a room that might contain you, then turns around and tries the other direction. It's quite methodical for someone operating at his current capacity. She pressed her fist against her mouth. Stop. He just called you absolutely unreasonable, the Duke reported, in the same quiet tone. His stopped. His looking at a portrait. His consulting it. She made a sound that was not entirely dignified. I think the portrait disagreed with him, he said. His moved on. The footsteps faded. She breathed. He turned from the door, and they were face to face at very close range, and she was still trying to contain what had come up through her chest, and she was not entirely succeeding, and he looked at her with the expression that was not the managed composure she had seen in the ballroom but something genuinely present, warm, slightly surprised at itself. She laughed. Properly, helplessly, with her hand over her mouth and her shoulders shaking, and the conservatory held it and the moon came through the glass and the plants were indifferent witnesses. He watched her laugh. His expression did something she suspected it did rarely. It softened. Not entirely. Not into anything saccharine or performed. Just a slight, genuine easing of the structural sternness, the way a room changed when a window was finally opened, and she saw in it, briefly, clearly, the person who had been waiting under the cold Duke for however long the cold Duke had been necessary. You have, he said, a very undignified laugh for a princess. I know, she said. I've been told. Good, he said. Don't fix it. Chapter 4. The morning after the Somerset ball, London did what London did, which was talk. By 10 o'clock, 3 different versions of the previous evening were circulating through drawing rooms across Mayfair. In one, the Duke of Ashbourne had inserted himself into a private matter and made a scene. In another, Princess Alara had engineered the entire episode to humiliate Julian Vane, using the Duke as a convenient prop. In the third, the one closest to the truth, which was therefore the least popular, Lord Julian had behaved atrociously and the Duke had simply noticed. Julian expected an apology. Alara knew this because Beatrice sent a note at 9 in the morning that managed, in 3 sentences, to suggest that Alara had overreacted, that Julian's feelings were hurt, and that a discreet reconciliation would be in everyone's interests. Alara read the note twice, confirmed her understanding of it, and fed it to the fireplace. She was in the palace library when her father's secretary arrived to tell her the Duke of Ashbourne was in the reception room and had requested an audience with the king. She went to the reception room. He was standing at the window in a coat that was, she noted, of a quality that communicated a great deal without saying anything, dark blue, impeccably cut, the kind of thing that cost more than most people spent on their horses and wore it with the complete indifference of someone who simply buys good things and forgets about them. He turned when she came in. Your Highness. What are you doing? She said. Waiting for your father. He had a leather document case under his arm. I have some business to discuss with him. What business? He considered her for a moment, the same assessing, direct attention, unchanged from the conservatory. Then, Julian Vane's family owes a debt to the Ashbourne estate. It has been owed for 11 years. I have been content to let it sit. He turned the case slightly in his hands. I am no longer content. She looked at the document case. You're going to use his debt. I'm going to present it to your father as the legal fact it is and make a proposal regarding its resolution. He paused. The proposal has conditions. What conditions? Julian Vane retires to the countryside. Permanently. I suggest Northumberland, which is very beautiful and very far from London. He said this without any apparent satisfaction, which made it more effective. In exchange for which I clear the debt entirely and ask nothing of the Vane family beyond the distance. Alara looked at him steadily. And the other condition? A pause. Not a long one. That I am permitted to court you properly. The reception room was very quiet. You read the diary, she said. I retrieved it from Beatrice last night. Yes. After the conservatory. He was direct about it, unapologetic, which she had come to expect. I read it because I wanted to understand what had been taken from you and how much damage had been done. He looked at her. I did not read it to collect advantages. I read it because she wrote, in November, about wanting to talk to someone who would argue back. Who would find the performance of court life as exhausting as she did. Who would let her be wrong about things and not pretend otherwise. Alara was very still. She wrote that she had never had that, he said. And she was 19. And I thought he stopped, and the controlled surface shifted slightly, the way it had in the conservatory over the fern. I thought that was considerably too long. Alara said. You can say You, he said. I thought that was considerably too long. She looked at the document case. She looked at him. You spent the night reading my diary and constructing a legal strategy. I read quickly, he said. The legal strategy was largely already prepared. Julian's debt has been available as leverage for some time. I simply hadn't had a reason to use it. He held her gaze. Now I have a reason. And if I tell you I don't want this, that I don't want Julian exiled, that I don't want to be managed, then I go home, he said, without hesitation. The diary is yours. He held out the document case, and she realized it contained, beside the legal papers, a small blue book. The debt I will find another use for or forgive entirely. And you are entirely free to manage the situation however you choose. She looked at the case. At the diary. At him. You would actually do that. "I told you last night," he said. "I bought nothing. I did not do any of this to own you. I did it because you deserve to choose, and the choice requires the situation to be cleared first." He paused. "I am very aware that there is a version of what I've done that looks like one powerful man substituting himself for another. I am asking you to believe that it isn't." "Why should I believe that?" "Because I told you last night that your laugh was undignified and told you not to fix it," he said. "Men who want to own women don't tell them to keep the inconvenient parts." She opened the document case. She took the diary, her diary, small and blue and full of everything she had been told was foolish, and held it. She looked at the legal papers. She looked at him. "My father," she said, "is going to have questions." "I have answers," he said. "He's protective. I would think less of him if he weren't. He's going to ask what your intentions are." "They are," the Duke said, with the flat and entire seriousness of someone reading directly from the truth without editorial, "to court you correctly, at your pace, with your full knowledge of everything I am and everything I am not, and to be the person who argues back and finds the performance exhausting and tells you the uncomfortable things when they need telling." He paused. "And to attend precisely as many events as are required to accomplish this, which I hope will be fewer than the ton considers standard." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "My father will see you now." She walked to the door, opened it, and held it for him, not because it was her role to hold doors but because she wanted to, and she was tired of only doing things for reasons. He walked through it. Then he stopped and said, "Your Highness." "Ilara," she said. "If you're going to court me properly, you should probably use my name." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. "Ilara," he said. She followed him toward her father's reception room, diary in hand, and the palace corridor was exactly as it had always been, stone and portraits and the ancient specific cold of a building that existed before either of them was born, but she walked through it differently than she had come down it, and she thought about a woman in a conservatory who had laughed undignifiedly at a man commentating on Julian Vane's consultation of a portrait, and she decided that woman had better ground under her feet than she'd had in a long time. The Duke of Ashbourne knocked on the king's door. The king said enter. They entered. Chapter 5. Julian left for Northumberland on a Wednesday, which was the least dramatic day of the week, and Ilara thought this was probably for the best. He did not go quietly, because Julian had never gone quietly in his life and Northumberland was too far away to make the noise worth hearing. There were letters, 3 of them, in descending order of indignation, and a final appeal to her father that was so poorly calibrated to the king's actual opinion of the situation that it may have done more damage than the original offense. The debt was cleared. The papers were signed. The distance was considerable. Beatrice was a more complicated matter. She was family, which meant the severing had to be done carefully and could not be done completely, and the social consequences of what she had done at the ball, reading aloud from a stolen diary while 400 people watched, accumulated around her over the following weeks with the particular permanence of things that have been witnessed. No one exiled her. No one needed to. The Ton had a long memory and very little sympathy for the spectacle of a woman undone by her own cruelty in front of a room full of witnesses. Ilara wrote her one letter, private and clear. She did not send another. The Duke courted her exactly as he had described, which was to say correctly and at her pace and with full disclosure on both sides. He came to the palace 3 times a week, in the late afternoon when the formal schedule permitted it, and they walked in the garden or sat in the library, and he argued with her about the books she was reading and she argued back, and it was, she could not think of a better word for it, restful, in the specific way that things are restful when they require you to be entirely present rather than performing. He told her about Derbyshire, about the estate, which was large and old and apparently in a state of ongoing conflict with its own drainage, she noted, which made her think of things she had read, and about the library, which was the room he lived in most consistently, and about the telescope he had in the east wing that he used for looking at stars from a roof terrace that his housekeeper considered unnecessarily dangerous. She told him about the quiet life. The real version, the one she had written about in the diary that he had read and returned to her without commentary or condition. The version that wasn't about escaping who she was but about finding a version of it that didn't require her to be less than she was at all times. You can have both, he said, one afternoon in the palace garden. It was December, and cold, and they were walking because walking was warmer than sitting, and neither of them had suggested going inside. Being exactly who you are and having it be quiet. They aren't in conflict. Court seems to think they are. Court, he said, thinks a great many things that are either wrong or self-serving or both. He looked at the bare winter trees with the straightforward disdain of a man who has been surveying the ton for 36 years and has long since stopped pretending to be impressed by it. Your position requires presence and duty. Those are real requirements, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. But they don't require performance. They require you. As you are. She looked at him. You find this obvious. I find it obvious, he agreed. I also found it impossible for a long time, which is why I understand why you might not. She stopped walking. He stopped with her, which he did whenever she stopped. She had noticed, not anxiously, not making a thing of it, simply paying attention. You found the genuine version of yourself impossible, she said. Because of the woman. Because of the woman, he confirmed. And because of my father, and the expectations of the dukedom, and 20 years of being told that my version of things was inconvenient. He was direct about it, the same way he was direct about everything. Then I decided to stop. Which is how I ended up in the gutter. The spacious gutter, she said. Yes. He looked at her, and the winter light was doing something to his face that softened the structural sternness into something she knew was not distance but its opposite. Which has been considerably less solitary, recently. She had been looking at him for several seconds. She was aware of this. She was aware that the garden was cold and that there were two ladies in waiting at the garden's eastern entrance who were performing a very convincing impression of not watching, and that the moment had arrived at a quality she recognized. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask. Was I, when you came to the ballroom, before you knew anything about me beyond the note, was I a problem to be solved? Was it the situation that brought you, or was it you, he said. The note said a princess was being publicly humiliated for wanting something real. That was enough. He paused. Everything afterward was because of you specifically. But the reason I came was you. She looked at the bare trees. At the garden that was all structure and no bloom in December, waiting for spring with the particular patience of things that have done this before and know it resolves. There is a question I haven't asked, she said. There is a question I haven't asked either, he said. I've been waiting. Waiting for what? For you to ask yours first. Since you seem to have been working up to it for approximately 6 minutes. She looked at him. He was watching her with the grey eyes and the expression that was not composed, not performed, not the cold Duke the Ton had named and filed and dismissed, but the person underneath that, serious, patient, entirely present, the person who had timed Julian Vane's circling of the corridor and reported it in real time while she hid behind a fern. If I asked you to go back to the beginning, she said. Not the legal arrangement with my father, not the Julian situation, not the debt or the exile. If I asked you to go back to the garden, to the first conversation, and ask me properly, what would you say? He was quiet for a moment. Then he did something she had not anticipated. He went to one knee, not the practiced, graceful, courtier's kneel that she had seen performed at court by men who had rehearsed it, but the actual, slightly effortful motion of a tall man lowering himself onto cold garden ground because the moment required it and he had decided not to manage the moment. He had no ring. He had, she looked, a flower. A small thing, pressed and dry, held between two fingers, which she recognized after a second as one of the specimens from the conservatory at the Somerset ball, which meant he had taken it, pressed it, and carried it for 6 weeks, and had said nothing. The gutter, he said, looking up at her, was a very poor metaphor. What I meant was, I have been outside the performance for long enough that I had begun to think the genuine version of things simply didn't exist in this world. His voice was entirely level, which she had learned meant he was being as honest as he knew how. And then a lady's maid sent a note to my club, and I came to a ballroom, and I watched a girl hold her spine exactly straight while her cousin read her diary aloud, and I thought, there it is. The genuine version. He paused. I am asking you, without contracts and without conditions and without legal arrangements, whether you will let me spend the rest of my life proving that the quiet version and the real version and the large and public version can all be the same thing. Whether you will let me be the person who argues back. The garden was very still. One of the ladies in waiting at the eastern entrance had stopped performing and was simply watching. Ilara looked at the pressed flower. At him. At the bare winter garden that was not trying to be anything other than what it was. She took the flower from his hand. Get up, she said. The ground is cold. He stood. He was very close and she was looking up at him and his expression was doing the thing she loved, the open, present, entirely undisguised thing that happened when he wasn't managing anything. The gutter, she said. The gutter, he agreed. It was getting rather crowded anyway. Something moved through his whole face, a complete, genuine thing, not the managed almost smile but the real version, the one she had first seen in the conservatory over the fern, and it was, she thought, the finest thing she had seen at court in 19 years. Was that a yes, he said. That was a yes, she said. He took her hand. Not the formal, gloved, processional hand of a duke and a princess in a palace garden. Her hand, both of his closing around it, warm and certain and deliberate. He stood close, and the winter light came through the bare trees, and the ladies in waiting were no longer pretending about anything. We will have to tell my father, she said. He's already expecting it. He told me on Wednesday. He told you on Wednesday, she repeated. And you waited until today too. You said you wanted to be asked at your pace, he said, entirely unbothered. Wednesday wasn't your pace. Today was your pace. He looked at her. I pay attention. Yes, she said, thinking of a note sent to a club, a fern, a pressed flower from a conservatory, the taxonomy of his silences she had apparently been building for 6 weeks. You do. They walked back toward the palace in the thin December light, and the garden was cold and the trees were bare and the ladies in waiting fell into their correct distance behind them, and Ilara held the pressed conservatory flower and thought about a diary full of wanting something real and a ballroom where she had stood with a broken fan and been certain, for one terrible minute, that wanting something real was the thing she would be punished for. She had been wrong about that. She was glad. At the palace door, he held it open because she had held a door for him once and he had, she saw now, remembered, and she walked through it and turned. One condition, she said. Name it. You will attend the minimum number of events required. She looked at him. Your words. I want that in writing. The minimum required, he said, has always been my position. Good. And the Northumberland estates are very beautiful, he said. And very far from London. Is there a library? There is an excellent library. A roof terrace with a telescope. The housekeeper considers it dangerous. I'd like to see it. He looked at her for a moment, at the flower in her hand and the winter garden behind her and whatever it was she had settled into, the real version, the quiet version, the one she had been writing about in small blue books since she was old enough to know what she wanted, and his expression was everything it had been in the conservatory and more, and he said, the terrace will be considerably less dangerous with company. That, she said, is the most romantic thing you've said to me. I am working on it, he said. I have had very limited practice. She laughed, undignifiedly, in the palace doorway, and he watched her with the expression that had been waiting for exactly that, and the winter light caught the old stone of the palace walls and did nothing to make them warmer and it didn't matter at all. She had arrived at the Somerset ball with a fan and a foolish hope and left with neither, and both were better for their absence. The Duke of Ashbourne attended the minimum number of required events for the rest of his life, which was a number he negotiated successfully with both his princess and the ton, and was considered by most accounts to be still too many. The diary was kept under a better lock. The gutter remained famously spacious, and they lived in it, the genuine version, the real one, which turned out to be the grandest version of all.